Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Ross Sandler, Director of the Center for New York City Law and a professor at New York Law School, and I welcome you to our 145th breakfast. And we're delighted to have Polly Trottenberg here, and a wonderful audience, and I think you filled the room, so that's really quite wonderful, and we're very happy to have so many people here. I'd like to start, though, by thanking the people who've sponsored these breakfasts and allow us to do these as often as we do and without charging. First, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, and sitting at this table, I want to thank them. They've been a sponsor now for many, many years, and I want to thank them particularly, Ed Wallace, who is the leader of that group. Consolidated Edison as a founding sponsor, and Verizon, founding sponsors starting almost 20 years ago, both of them, and they've been a major sponsor. And then all of you, oh, okay, that's good. I think I'll call up Con Edison and tell them they got an applause. And then I'd like to also thank those of you who have the gold star, which indicates that your voluntary contributions, small contributions to keep these breakfasts going, and there are contribution forms on the table if others would like to join in helping to support these breakfasts. We have two more scheduled this term. Tony Shorris will be here in October, and then we'll have another one in November. I'd also particularly like to thank the Capolino firm and Jim Capolino personally as a special sponsor of this breakfast. They have been a wonderful sponsor over the years, and I remember Jim Capolino when he was in junior high. He's been a great man. So let me begin first by introducing the president and dean of this law school, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much, Ross, and welcome to all of you. We're thrilled that you're here today, and we are tremendously honored to have the commissioner with us, along with members of her legal team, Phil Damashek and Susan Rogerson-Pondish, and I see old friends Franco Esposito and David Fenichel here. You have an extraordinary legal team, and they're all part of this community. We're really thrilled that they are here with you today. Not every commissioner brings their lawyers, and we are glad you have. We encourage that, the more the better. And I want to give a special shout out to someone it's their first time here, Paul Rodriguez, who is the counsel to Mayor de Blasio. We're thrilled that you're here too, Paul. Welcome. And transportation is perhaps one of the most important things we are looking at in these days when there is a major national dialogue, really international dialogue on infrastructure and the future of our cities, creating sustainable cities and environments that can thrive economically for everyone. And we're really pleased that New York Law School is part of that discussion and is training new lawyers to go out and be part of the solution. It's interesting that in New York City we have 12,000 miles of sidewalks, and one thing we tell to our students is that when you look at that, that's streets and sidewalks that when put end to end, they extend halfway around the world. That's pretty extreme. For some who are interested in going into tort law, they say it's a permanent employment program. I say it's just a great challenge, and it's amazing. I want to congratulate the commissioner for being tremendously successful at implementing Mayor de Blasio's Vision Zero plan, which makes our streets as safe as possible, and it has really helped us to become a far more safe and a far more viable city. Fortunately, we have somebody at the helm at DOT who's not just experienced, but brings a wealth of knowledge and managerial talent, and from the reports I get inside the agency, she is beloved and really respected, and everyone appreciates what she's brought to the agency. So thank you. I'm going to turn the floor back over to Ross. I just want to mention that the commissioner has very generously offered to give a little of her time after this to our students in a separate room. So for those of you who are students in the audience, please make yourselves available and take the opportunity to have a brief conversation with the commissioner. We're grateful for that. That will be terrific. And Steve Lewis, who's chief of legal counsel at the law department, and an adjunct here is going to be part of that discussion. So that'll be very nice. All right, Ross?
We really are honored to have Polly Trottenberg here. She brings to the position of Commissioner of Department of Transportation enormous experience, more than almost anybody I can remember. Her administrative experience at the Department of Transportation, on the Federal Department of Transportation, she was the Assistant Secretary and then Undersecretary, the third highest position, both confirmed by the Senate, running incredibly important programs for the country. One called TIGER, which is an acronym, unfortunate acronym, I think, but nonetheless an acronym for a program that brings massive amounts of money for innovative and economically important projects. Here in New York, we have a number of them, including the $83 million project, a planning program for Moynihan Station. In addition to the administrative experience, she has a vast legislative experience in Washington, working for Senator Schumer, Senator Boxer, and Senator Moynihan in the top positions with those important people, including working at the time of 9/11, putting together the program that helped rebuild the city, particularly the lower Manhattan period. She also, before that, worked at the Port Authority and in aviation and other areas in the 1990s. So when you put this all together, let me say I have some familiarity with the Department of Transportation, and going back to the formation of the department in 1966, putting together highways, traffic, the ferries, and construction, bridges. And looking back on all those wonderful people who held that position, I can't think of anyone that you wouldn't almost call them an amateur compared to what Polly Trottenberg brings to this position. She is the most experienced, the most professional of all the commissioners of the Department of Transportation over its 60-year history. So this is we are really delighted to have such a person in that position, and we welcome her to this forum. Polly Trottenberg.
All right, now I'm really tall. I don't know. Does that work? Let me see. No, we'll go tall. Well, Dean Cowell and Ross, those were exceptionally generous introductions. I'm feeling a little daunted now, Ross. One of the nice things about being a commissioner in this city is you get to know many of your predecessors and draw on their wisdom and their advice, and that is one of the special parts of this. And Dean Cowell is right. I do like to travel with my lawyers. I treasure them. In this job, I really rely on their guidance and wisdom pretty much every day of the week. And a bunch of them are here. He mentioned Phil and Susan Dave, but a bunch of my other staff here. I see Helene Holloway, my Director of Human Resources. I have a lot of DOT people. Maybe they would stand up so we could applaud them for their labors. And particularly last time I was here, actually, it was to see David Fanischel, who is our Senior Counsel for Ethics, get the annual Government and Ethics Award. He is particularly valuable in these challenging times in making sure everything we do in our agency is completely appropriate. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about our strategic plan, which is really just my ability to run through some of the key issues, challenges, and opportunities that we're facing at New York City DOT, and then very, very anxious to get questions from what is a very distinguished audience. And I know this is a speaker series that attracts really terrific audience and terrific questions. So let's, now the moment of truth. Will the PowerPoint work? Yes, it will. Okay. I think some of these statistics I'm going to run through quickly because a lot of you are very familiar with them, but they are very important, particularly in the transportation context, but in other contexts, housing and other things. New York City, as you know, right now we are experiencing a boom. It is a terrific problem to have. Population now the highest in the city's history, over 8.5 million and growing. We've had tremendous job creation, the kind of job creation that cities around the country and the world, frankly, are envious of, and an incredible boom in tourism. And it's been very interesting from the transportation point of view. If you look at how we've accommodated that growth, It's been really a remarkable story of, the rise once again of our subway system and of accommodating so many of those trips by subway. I'm going to tell a little bit of the story of buses. We've had some ups and downs on the bus, but from where we sit in New York City DOT, also tremendous growth in cycling, growth citywide in ferry services. And if you look, the challenge we see is we've accommodated so much of that growth in what we would call the sustainable modes. We've seen basically fairly flat growth in vehicle travel, but we have certainly seen, and I hear it all over the city, from the mayor on down, the challenge of rising congestion, basically mobility getting around, particularly the central business core of the city. And look, here's my favorite picture, you all know if you're in this city, our streets are packed, our subways are packed, our bridges are packed, even now our bike lanes are packed. And so the challenge for us at DOT is how do we, as a transportation agency, and we don't control all parts of the transportation system, continue to accommodate this phenomenal growth, make sure we continue this economic growth, make sure we continue the mobility that everyone in the city relies on, and do it in a way that meets the goals of the de Blasio administration: equity, environmental sustainability, and safety. So here are our core mission. Don't worry, I'm not going to do all these bubbles. For the sake of brevity, I will pick 3 of the key ones, and we'll talk quickly through them. But these are sort of, I think, the typical bubbles you would see for a transportation agency: safety, mobility, economic growth, maintaining core infrastructure. And again, I think one of our goals has been, in particular in this city, New York is like no other American city in terms of the fact that 2/3 of our trips are done not by vehicles. And for us, continuing that mix is very, very important. Another important theme in the de Blasio administration, which I'm sure you all know, is making sure that even as the city has grown and prospered, that growth and prosperity is being shared all over the city, particularly in underserved parts of the city. Underserved in terms of the transportation network and in terms of economic opportunity. And then finally, it is, I think, and I know I see some technology experts in this audience, it is an incredible era for technology, for smart cities. In New York City, we are both sometimes the leading edge of technology and then the lumbering giant trying to catch up. But this is an age where camera analytics, sensors, the kind of data that we now have access to is revolutionizing how we do everything. Enforcement, sidewalk inspections, bike share, you name it. So I think the Dean started to mention a bit about our inventory. I do like to show it here. You can see really what a massive transportation agency we are. And I have a new one that I'm going to be adding, and this is certainly probably of interest to the legal minds. I'm going to put a new slide in there which says 160,000 corners in New York City, very relevant for some of the legal issues we're dealing with. So just to jump into some key parts of the plan, and I think I forgot Ross or the Dean mentioned safety as our biggest focus. And Vision Zero has been one of the top priorities for Mayor de Blasio in this administration. When he came in as mayor, some of you may remember, now almost 4 years ago, the city experienced a tragic spate of traffic fatalities, including several children. And it became basically, essentially the first week he got on the job, one of our key focuses. And he did something that you haven't seen in a lot of other cities. He pulled together all the agencies, including NYPD, DOT, Taxi and Limousine Commission, DCAS, obviously, which handles city purchasing and city fleet, and really tasked us. He said, you have 30 days to come up with an action plan. I wasn't even technically on the job at that point, but we jumped right into it, and I have to say, it's been one of the most fascinating, rewarding, and challenging initiatives I've ever been a part of, and really something I think that we're so proud of because has made such a huge difference on the streets here. And I will say one thing, the mayor really, not only did he task us to put our heads together and come up with the plan, but he really gave us the resources and the leadership to do that, and I've been grateful. And you can take a look here at the statistics. Last year for New York City was our safest year in terms of roadway fatalities since the city started keeping records back in 1910. And one thing that's really important to note is, unfortunately, at the national level, Ross mentioned I worked for some years at US DOT. Nationally, in the past 3 years, traffic fatalities have gone up about 15%. The trend, unfortunately, nationwide is going in the other direction. Here in the city, we've gone down about 22%. So we've bucked the national trend. And it has been, I think, a tremendous effort on the streets and something we're going to continue to work on. And just to talk a little bit, I think some of you know there have been a lot of elements to the work we've done, education and enforcement, but we're particularly proud from the DOT point of view on some of the engineering projects we've done. And you can see here just some of the elements: crosswalks, bike lanes, building out pedestrian areas. And just, I wanted to highlight a couple that we're particularly proud of. They've gotten a lot of coverage. Queens Boulevard, which 2 predecessors ago for me, Commissioner Weinschall sort of was unfortunately there in the days when Queens Boulevard became known as the Boulevard of Death. And actually, I'm humbled in that I'm building on the work that she did and my immediate predecessor, Jeanette Sada-Khan, did to continue to make that street safer. There was a time when Queens Boulevard in 1 year had 24 fatalities. We've now been through a period where we've had over 2 years with no fatalities, and it's been, I think, a remarkable turnaround. And then some work as one of the other key initiatives of the de Blasio administration has been, as a lot of you know, to do rezonings around the city to try and accommodate our need for affordable housing and community development. And DOT has been a big part of those efforts, in particular where we're looking to add housing and population and density coming in to do the kind of roadway improvements and safety work that really help complete those neighborhoods. And Atlantic Avenue is going to be one of those places. Just quickly, part of the success of Vision Zero has also been some of the legislative work that we've been able to do, and I know a lot of folks in the room are legislative experts. We had a lot of success up in Albany early on. We were able to get the city's speed camera program expanded from 20 cameras to 140. We were able to do something that I didn't even think was possible, which was get the city's default speed limit lowered from 30 to 25. There's a wonderful article for those of you who are history buffs. If you go back to 1964, there's a New York Times article about how Ross, a distant predecessor of ours, Commissioner Henry Barnes, was decrying the fact that the state legislature in Albany had lowered the statewide default speed limit raised it from 25 to 30. So 50 years later, we finally got it back down to what should be a safe speed in New York City. And then at the local level, we've had various pieces of legislation we've done with the city council. It's easier to get things done in the city council, including the right-of-way law, which is actually, for the lawyers in the room, was an interesting balancing act of the traditional liability of when a pedestrian is stepping into a crosswalk. At what point do we declare that they have the safe passage? And I think we've now started to become one of the leading edge cities on that question. But we always have more work to do on the legislative front, and just sort of a little interesting lesson about the victories you have up in Albany. This is a map that shows, although we now have the ability to deploy we can deploy cameras in 140 school zones in New York City. There are about 2,400 school zones in New York City. And the legislation in Albany restricts us to only having our speed cameras operational during school hours, when school is in session, and only on streets that actually physically abut the schools. So if you look at all those dots, that's a 5-year period showing all the places where people were unfortunately either killed or severely injured, where either because of time or place, we could not deploy a speed camera. So even though the speed cameras have been a tremendous tool for us in Vision Zero, we still have a lot of restrictions on how we use them, and we have been back up in Albany trying to get that authority expanded. We were actually successful this year in getting the Assembly to vote in favor of that, but we will continue on that. And here you can see some of our other legislative priorities up there. Now, one of our other key priorities, this one I think very familiar, continuing again, as I said, in a city where we're facing such growth and such economic activity, making sure we can continue to have the mobility we need. And I think a lot of you have probably heard about what has become one of our signature initiatives with the MTA, which is Select Bus Service, which is basically the New York City version of bus rapid transit that you might have seen in Latin America or Europe. And it really has been a terrific partnership between the two agencies. Bus service is often a challenge area of urban transportation, because typically there'll be a transit agency, just as we have here in New York. It's a state agency that actually runs the bus system, but the city streets, the signal timing, the bus stops on the sidewalks, those are handled by the local transportation agency. And this has become a tremendous process between the two of us. We now have 14 Select Bus Service lines up and running. You can see where they are on the map, and have all the key features which speed up the amount of time it takes you to get on and off the bus and get where you're going. And right now we're proud to say we have New York City has on a given day about 2.5 million bus rides. We're now over 10% of those in the most congested corridors are being done with SBS. And again, just to talk a bit about some of these elements, in Manhattan, on the crosstown buses, 50% of the time you spend on your bus trip is waiting to get on and off the bus. And one of the great innovations, many places have been doing it for years, is buy your ticket off the bus. Get on all the doors and you save a tremendous amount of time. We're also doing things like signal prioritization, so when the bus gets to a light, it'll hold it green a little bit longer. So some things which they've been in the toolkit of improving bus service for many years, but here in New York City, we're catching up now and trying to bring them all over the city. Another big area for us, cycling. Again, building on the work of my predecessors, we now have in New York City one of the biggest bike networks, I would say, in the world, over 1,100 miles, and something the mayor has challenged us to see how can we really double the number of people who are cycling. We've set pretty aggressive targets for building out the bike network every year, which so far we've been able to exceed. And we've also been looking now at some of the questions. If you go to European cities, one of the things you'll see that they often do differently, they'll have massive places where people park their bikes. And we're starting to try and figure out how we can in New York fit in some of that bike parking. A lot of you are familiar with City Bike, which has been a tremendous success in this city. We are very close to hitting the 50 millionth ride for the system that's been up since 2013. Membership is continuing to grow, and yeah, we've now just hit on our busiest day 74,000 rides. And you can see here's the map of how the system has expanded. We are just finishing up the phase 3 part, which is that sort of deeper blue. The question, or actually the deeper blue and then the orange. The question we now face, and some of you have probably been reading about this, is we have a model where we have bikes are put into docks. We set aside space either on the sidewalk or at the curb. But now there's a whole new generation of bike share technology, which is called dockless technology. It's originated in China, but now it's starting to come into American cities, Seattle and DC and Dallas. And for us, we've been, I think, grappling with the issue of there's a lot we would love to embrace about this new technology. It's much less expensive, it's much less capital intensive, it's much more nimble. But we already have an existing dock system which has been such a success and worked very, very well, and it's been very, very safe. So we're looking at how we can integrate those two models. And I'm sure people here may have some thoughts on that. And then I want to just take a minute to talk about, obviously, another key piece of mobility, and one that this agency has been very, very focused on. And I think with the help of a lot of the experts in this room, how do we continue to make this city as accessible as we can for people with disabilities, working particularly on accessible pedestrian signals, and again, the focus, as I mentioned, on our 162,000 corners in New York City, doing everything we can to improve and upgrade our pedestrian ramp program. I will jump to what I think is sort of the last part I'm going to talk about, and very key. I know I see a lot of people in the room who are our partners in the contracting field who help us do a lot of the work of maintaining all our assets. And, it's extraordinary. People fail to appreciate when you look overall at New York City's transportation assets, if you include the subways, you include the roads, the bridges, the tunnels, it's assets worth well over $1 trillion. And their economic value is absolutely priceless. You can't even put a price tag on it. And I know from my predecessors before me, for the city's infrastructure, a lot of it is pretty old. The average age of our almost 400 bridges is 70 years. And as our chief bridge engineer likes to say, and they're not getting any younger. Not only coming up with the resources to maintain and renew that infrastructure, but now face the challenge of, again, as the city's growing, trying to add new capacity, something we spend a lot of time thinking about, and particularly how we can, again, avail ourselves of all the new technologies that are out there to try and up our game in terms of asset management. So, first of all, one of the challenges we have in this city and this state, and I'm sure there are some procurement experts in the room, we do have, as Ross was mentioning, I have previously had federal experience, and with the Tiger Grant program, where I did get to work with states and jurisdictions all over the country. Coming here to New York again, I think I can safely say we have the most complicated procurement system in the United States, and keeps a lot of people employed, don't get me wrong, and that's why I travel with my lawyers, as was said. But for us, figuring out how to continually improve and streamline that process, but both for the benefit of saving taxpayer dollars and for the contracting partners we work with, because there's a lot of frustration on their part too. Jobs take a long time, it's hard for them to get paid. We have a whole cycle of change orders and negotiations and complexities. So we have been trying very much at the agency level to up our game there. And fits and starts, sometimes goes better than others. And to work with our city partners. We have folks here from the city law department and other city agents to see what we can do to try and speed up our projects, get better value out of taxpayer dollars. One of the things that we're particularly interested in has become a bit of a quixotic crusade for me, is for the city to have design-build authority. And a lot of you are familiar with this. This is the standard now pretty much all over the country, and it's been the standard all over the world in infrastructure for decades. The state has this authority, which enables you basically to truncate the bidding process from first bidding, putting out a procurement for a design, then a separate procurement for a build, and then trying to meld those two things together, which often takes a long time, involves a lot of change orders and lawsuits, to making it one streamlined process. The state has used it to great effect. You've seen some of the results, the Kosciuszko Bridge, the Tappan Zee Bridge, et cetera. We have been trying up in Albany to get this authority for the city. Sadly, we have not yet succeeded at the legislative front, but it has certainly been, I think, an effort we will continue. And again, it is something that for the taxpayers of New York City would potentially save us millions of dollars on not only DOT projects, but projects for all our sister agencies, Department of Design and Construction, DEP, you name it, could save our taxpayers millions of dollars and get those projects done faster. Because one of the challenges we face in infrastructure, there's understandably right now a healthy amount of public skepticism. We say, we need the resources, we're going to bring the projects. And they say, yeah, but it's been 7 years that you promised us that whatever, and we still haven't seen it. So both in terms of dollars and time savings, design build is very crucial. So just to sort of summarize, overall, we are an agency with an enormous sweep and scope, and I've showed you the 6 core missions. We have a number of goals and a number of initiatives that we are seeking to complete. But I'm also very humbled by the fact that the work we do, we really do rely on a number of partners. Some of them here are partners in city government, our contractors, and a lot of people in this community I see in the legal and government and contracting community who help us get our work done. We are never too proud to ask for your help and wisdom. And you know, I have to say it has been an exciting and rewarding first 4 years in the de Blasio administration. I'm looking forward to the next 4. We'll see how the election turns out. It doesn't seem to be much of a cliffhanger, but you never know. And now I'm happy to take questions.
Those who have been here before, you know, you line up at the microphones and we'll take people in order. As people line up, I just want to thank the staff who put this program together. Brian Kasuba, our Assistant Director of the Center, Lillian Valle Santiago, Jesse Deno, Jonathan Sizemore, and Shelby Hoffman, all at the Center for New York City Law, and they're the ones who make this all possible. Let me say, you attract a lot of questioners. So we will
Always.
We will end this program exactly at 9:30. So please, as a courtesy to the others, short comments and so that the commissioner has an opportunity to speak and the people who are standing get an opportunity to ask questions. So let's start on this side.
Yes, hello. Is the mic on?
Yes.
Good, okay. My name is Judy Richheimer. I am here primarily representing the Guides Association of New York City Organic. Just 2 quick items. Number 1, although we've had some lovely ad hoc help from Margaret Forgione and your other Manhattan deputies, we are in need of a more coordinated approach to getting conversation going and new policy put in place for police, DOT, and the tour guiding community. And perhaps you can put me in touch with one of your famous lawyers to try to begin that conversation. And the other item is, and this is speaking
Let's stop there.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead. And
My most famous lawyer is sitting right there, the legendary Phil Damashek. But what do you need from us? What's not happening?
Well, the primary problem is that although Margaret has been tremendous in terms of troubleshooting for us, the various police agencies involved in ticketing, basically that's it, don't get the same memos. And so there needs to be, so she'll step in after the problem is, created, but we need to set up a better system of communication that you mentioned tourism, that takes tourism into account as one of the partners at the table when DOT works out its overall plan.
Okay, are you tour buses in
Yes, yeah.
Okay, yes.
So that's just something I want to draw to your attention.
Okay.
And the other quick item is, and this has to do not just with tourism, but everyday New Yorkers. Will there ever come a day again when we have all 4 corners of an intersection with street signs on them, or even 3 or even 2 corners with street signs?
Please let those, we have so many other questioners.
Well, although I can't resist taking the bait on a sign question. With this august audience, how many signs do you think are in the New York City DOT inventory? You probably know. It is 1 million signs. And we are just now, I'm so proud to say, speaking of technology, we have now, for the first time, come together with a modern, searchable, fantastic database of all our sign data, which is not just the 1 million, because many of them have installation histories even going back to the 50s. So it is funny, people are often asking me, why can't you just put up that one more sign? And part of the challenge is we have a lot of signs, and maintaining them and keeping them in good working order and making sure they're not fading or getting hit by cars is a very, very big job. So for sometimes big intersections, we'll put up the 3 or the 4, but we are also trying to put up what is needed for visibility, safety, et cetera, and not continually add to what is in the sign inventory, because that becomes a challenge to maintain in its own right. So there, I took the bait on the sign.
Let's go on this side.
Yeah.
Within the last 2 years, I told you I was stranded in Brooklyn, Greenpoint section, in February 2001, and so far you haven't given me a response. Much like the MTA, which stands for money thrown away, I give you an agenda and you turn around and burn me.
Okay, thank you.
Well, hi, Mr. Rex. Good to see you. Haven't seen you at a board meeting for a while. I didn't quite understand what you said. What was the?
I said within the last 2 years, I told you I was stranded in Brooklyn, Greenpoint section, February 2001.
Waiting for a bus?
Yeah, well, why don't you just contact Andy Albert, because I gave the details to him.
Okay, I'm happy to talk to Andrew.
Because apparently you're not listening.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Winfield, and I'd like to compliment the commissioner and your staff for an excellent job.
I'm going to savor the moment. Thank you so much.
Now the question,
I knew there'd be a hook.
but it's a good one. I'd like to know if you would share, what do you think is your greatest achievement in this job? Thank you.
Well, all right. Thank you for the kind words. And again, I one thing in these jobs, and you know this, Rush, you get very humbled by the fact people pay you compliments, but it's really the amazing team you have that helps you in a big city agency and a big city government. Look, I'm going to say, again, I think what I started with Vision Zero. You know, one thing is I sort of put the numbers up there about how fatalities have gone down, but I always like to say also, those aren't just numbers, obviously. Those are our fellow New Yorkers. Those are our friends, our family members, our co-workers, and our neighbors. And, you know, I talk to transportation officials all over the country, and in a lot of other cities in the past couple of years, fatalities have been going up and they've been despairing. Ours have been going in the other direction, and that is life safe. There's always more work to do. I mean, the goal of Vision Zero, right, is nobody is getting killed on our roadways. But I think for our team, the work that we've done collectively to make our streets safer is certainly the thing I'm the most proud of.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is George Calderaro, and a lot of people complain about reckless bicyclists, including me sometimes, but I have a question about bicycle bias by the NYPD and the justice system. For example, a bicyclist was recently riding on a relatively empty street in Harlem at 8 a.m. He stopped at a light. There was no one coming at all, pedestrian or car, and went through the light and did the same thing at another light. He was pulled over by an unmarked car. The street was so empty that he said, "You're pulling me over?" Because he didn't know it was a cop. And the cop said, "Who else is there?" He gave him 2 tickets, and the guy said he was not guilty, went to court and was charged $545 for those tickets, which is 10 times more, as you probably might know, than a car would get if he stopped by a pedestrian light. This is clearly entrapment by the cop and bias by the justice system, the DMV, and there's thousands of people out there paying thousands of dollars in fines, and I've spoken with agencies, I've spoken with the transportation alternatives, I'm going to talk to your lawyers, please stick around, but
Okay,
really this is...
Okay, we have that question.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and as you saw from my presentation, we are increasingly becoming a biking city. Our network of bike lanes is growing, City Bike is growing, and by the way, bike ridership in the city is growing exponentially. It's been extraordinary, actually. But it is also true that I think we are in something of a cultural transition, and that's true at the NYPD level. We do work very closely with them on trying to come up with basically enforcement and education that works for cyclists and for motor vehicles. It is an evolutionary process, and I will say you can certainly see a lot of enforcement as done, a lot of you know, in New York City, very much with discretion at the precinct level. And I think there's a lot of logic to that. It's a very big city, and there are a lot of different priorities and needs when you get to the precinct level. But you can certainly, I would say, sometimes see as a result things can be kind of inconsistent, and there are certainly cases we've seen where we think the enforcement that was done didn't make sense, and I certainly speak to my counterparts at NYPD about it, and happy to talk to you more about it. It is a challenge to get the balance right of making sure that that all the users on the roadway are using them safely, that they're treating each other respectfully, and look, I apologize in cases where we haven't gotten it right yet, but I would say I think the city overall has made some progress in that score.
Good morning. My name is Susan Wright. I'm an architect with IBI Group, and I thank you again for all of your energies. As a child who grew up watching the Jetsons, I can almost not believe I'm going to say this, but you should be including as part of your look forward autonomous vehicles, which will come to New York 5, 10 years from now, and will influence all of these things you've talked about. It's not really a question, it's just a suggestion that it should be part of what you're looking at.
Yeah, thanks for the question, and we are actually spending a good amount of time looking at the question of autonomous vehicles, and particularly something we've joined with a lot of our sister cities. How will they work in an urban environment? I think there's a lot of progress now in envisioning how they might work in a somewhat access-controlled highway situation, but once they get on urban streets, particularly streets like New York where you have such a profusion of pedestrians and other things, how can we make sure they'll operate safety? As a lot of you know, there is a lot of activity at the federal level and some at the state level, and we are certainly trying to, I would say there's a group of cities trying to insert themselves into that discussion, not with too much success at the moment. We are also at the city level, we've actually gotten federal funds to do a big pilot with connected vehicles, which is sort of another version of autonomous vehicles. We're looking how those would work in an urban environment. We've been doing some testing. We're working with some sister cities on that as well. So yes, it is a huge important area that I think cities are going to be challenged to make sure that frankly, particularly at the federal level, that the particular safety and operational needs that matter to us are really taken into account.
My name is Peter Cohen. I'm with the Transportation Research Forum. And regarding your BQE project, is consideration being given to the possibility of lowering vehicle miles traveled by truck to and from the site, carrying construction materials, to perhaps having a barge-mounted concrete plant, or just in general bringing out the demolition waste and bringing in construction materials by barge, so it's just a short hop to the actual site?
Yeah, I mean, let me take a second to describe the project. I think actually, whoops, I'd like to show the slide. Oh no, I don't have that slide anymore. We cut it out in the interest of brevity. Those of you who are familiar with the project, if you know Brooklyn, it's sort of the stretch of highway that runs essentially from the Manhattan Bridge along through Brooklyn Heights down into Carroll Gardens. And at one point, this was built in the Robert Moses era because Brooklyn Heights did not want to have itself flattened. It's a stacked roadway of 3 levels. It's a cantilever. It is an antiquated, decrepit, challenging structure. And it now has next to it a beautiful park called Brooklyn Bridge Park, which, if we had done the project sooner, would have been our staging area. So one of the things, and furthermore, it's an artery that carries over 140,000 vehicles every day. It is one of the most crucial highways in the whole city. So one of the things we are going to be looking at for sure as we take bids on the project is bidders who will come to the table with, I think, what is going to have to be some of the world's most innovative solutions to deal with the staging, the traffic management, perhaps how we get supplies in and out. So believe me, we are wide open to any creative ideas, and we already held one charrette with a lot of experts because we were humble enough to know this project is so challenging. We need to hear from people, hopefully all over the world, who know how to do projects like this. Most of them looked at it and said, wow, we've never seen anything quite like this one. People from Europe and Asia, the biggest global experts in the world, were a little befuddled about what to do. So happy to talk to you again. We're open to all ideas. It is going to be, I think, probably, I would say, among the top, if not the top, challenging projects my agency will do in the next 20 years.
Thank you.
Could you just say the budget size of it and how long you think the project will take?
We're currently budgeted, DOT's portion is $1.7 billion, a couple $100 million more for the parks piece of it. That number will probably go up a little bit. And I mean, look, it's a project I think we're hoping we're going to start in about 2 years and will be 5 to 6 years duration, but I'm not going to, please don't hold me to every single one of those numbers. But it is for us, it'll certainly be the biggest project the agency's undertaken in recent memory.
My name is James Beichman. I'm a community board member, but I'm not here in that capacity. We all commend the bike program, but we do wish people would learn to stop at traffic lights. What I would like to ask is, there's now kind of a movement toward the conversion of major arteries, major streets, to bike and pedestrian ways, starting with 14th Street when the L train shuts down. The people who live on either side of that, the numbered streets, of course, are terrified by the increased traffic. I'm one of them. And the issues of delivery and trucks and things like that. My question is, how is the department addressing this? Have you solicited public opinion? When will you solicit public opinion? And how, as opposed to the advocates who seem to have a very, very strong voice these days?
Excellent question. I'm a former resident of 14th Street myself, so very familiar with the neighborhood and all the challenges there. And I think a lot of you know in the room the project that we're talking about, which is the MTA to fix Hurricane Sandy damage that was done in the tunnel that carries the L train. They're going to have to shut the line down for a year and a half. And it's funny, they've shut down other lines and other tunnels, but you know, one of the virtues of the New York City subway system, it has tremendous redundancy in it. And you know, they shut down the Montague Tunnel, and frankly, they shut down our train service for a while. You would have barely noticed. L train service, that is the main service that runs through that part of Brooklyn, of course, across 14th Street. And so tremendous impacts when that line is shut down. But the work is absolutely essential. And I give the MTA credit. I think they have tried every way they can to truncate the process and do the project as smartly as they can. The good news is, coming in from the Brooklyn side, a lot of the travelers will be accommodated through subway service. We'll also be looking to improve bike service. We're improving approaches on the Williamsburg Bridge on the Williamsburg side and Delancey Street, use of ferries. So trying as much as we can to keep people on the mass transit system. We will be certainly facing the challenge of running the buses across 14th Street. And bus traffic on 14th Street right now and subway traffic is enormous. We'll have to accommodate tens of thousands of people. But I will reassure you a little bit, because we are really taking a very smart look. And it was very funny. The advocacy community said, let's shut down 14th Street to all vehicles. We'll just do buses and bikes. And then immediately 13th Street and 15th Street and 12th Street and 16th Street said, well, wait a minute. We're not so sure we like that plan. We are doing a very careful traffic analysis that's looking at the whole network, not just 14th Street, and trying to come up with a very balanced plan where there may be parts of 14th Street where certain times of day we're going to have bus-only access, but it's not going to be no cars, no loading. That's not our plan. And it's increasingly been our experience in places where we want to do a major bus route, that's not a place you're actually going to put a bike lane as well. So you're probably going to need to separate those. But we have done a number of community meetings. We are actually going to be coming back in the next couple of months to do another series. And community input has been really, really valuable in this process.
Thank you. You might consider taking one of the numbered streets, which is residential, and just making it a bikeway.
We are considering that very thing.
Thank you.
So
On this side?
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you for being present. I'm Chelsea from Transportation Alternatives. We were talking earlier about mobility and getting around the city in the age of Vision Zero, and I think a room full of lawyers would agree that Vision Zero enforcement is a tricky business, not something everyone wants to be implicated in when we have such an amazing street safety network. As advocates, how can we ask the commissioner on behalf of the city agency, but also of our elected officials, in a moment when just this week we saw a plan for Midtown, as you mentioned earlier, one of the most highly dense neighborhoods and coveted neighborhoods for foot and bike and all sorts of traffic and movement. How can we ask for commitment for a Vision Zero safety network on Fifth Avenue when we saw a bus and car only plan earlier this week, and then just a couple nights ago at Town Hall, we heard from the mayor that bike enforcement was the key to Vision Zero and ticketing cyclists. So how do we address this?
Yeah,
our
let me,
representatives?
thanks for the question. And I would say I was a little remiss in talking about Vision Zero. Part of what has been, I think, as I like to say, the wind in our sails and those who keep us honest has been the Advocacy Committee in New York City, Transportation Alternatives and the other groups. It is one of the things that distinguishes us from a lot of other cities I talk to. I don't know that there's any city that has as savvy and effective an advocacy community as this one, and certainly the safety advocates have been amazing partners. Let me talk specifically about Fifth Avenue, and some of you may have followed this. So I hear a lot on a bunch of levels as New York City DOT Commissioner. The main things I hear is the traffic in New York City is unbearable, it's killing us. We need a dedicated network of bus lanes. The city is failing to provide the kind of high-speed bus service that we desperately need. And of course, we want to continue to build out a safe bike network. The challenge is those are all competing uses on the same set of city streets, which are not getting any bigger. On Fifth Avenue carries 75,000 passengers, bus passengers. That is bigger than the passenger, the ridership of some transportation systems citywide. So it's an extraordinary volume of passengers. And there's long been a desire to add another bus lane on Fifth Avenue. We have been looking at the bike lane. The challenge is, again, trying to balance congestion and safety, because along the other side of Fifth Avenue, you have a tremendous volume of pedestrians who often spill into the intersections. You have a tremendous number of taxi cabs dropping off and picking up because you have a lot of desirous places that people want to visit. So we have been hard at work in trying to figure out how to design a bike lane that will be safe. I think, unfortunately, we haven't quite gotten there. It is not that we don't want to, but we don't want to design a bike lane that doesn't function well. We want to have a bike network which is safe and successful. And I think our theory is, it's certainly meeting a little resistance, is we're ready to do the second bus lane. That's going to handle helping bus speeds for 75,000 daily riders. We don't want to put that on hold till we work out all the safety issues in the bike lane. But I assure you, we are looking at the bike lane, and we will try and figure out how to do it.
My name is Tony Mannheim. I am a born and bred New Yorker starting 80 years ago. For the last 57 years, I've been living right on top of your BQE cantilever. So I have a number of issues suggestions I want to make. I'll be as brief as possible. Most notable improvement in city transit, arguably, is the ferry system, which the city has taken over and has made major improvements to two of the three elements the operator of a ferry system can control: reliability and frequency. The third, cost to the user, is still out there. And competing with this, in a ludicrous mistake, is the mayor's proposal for a high-speed rail line parallel to a 3-stop ferry service up the East River on the eastern Brooklyn-Queens side. It is just mindless, and the money allocated or to be allocated for that light rail project should be instead dedicated to integrating the cost to the user of ferry service with the transportation system, so there is free transfers between the subway and bus system collectively on the one hand and the ferry system on the other, and the discounted senior citizen and disabled applies. Secondly,
May I ask you to stop there? That's a good question, and let's cover that, and then we'll have to go on to other people.
All right, so, well, I think there are a couple questions even in the one question. Certainly agree, if you look at the way modern cities are going, they are now trying to create completely seamless, integrated, fair media that can be used on all their different modes. London with the Oyster card, a bunch of cities have done it. We certainly need to do it here in New York. I agree with you. There, I think, have been a certain number of institutional and technological challenges. We haven't really yet integrated city-provided transit services with MTA-provided transit services, but I can assure you, it has certainly been on our list to try and get that done. We totally agree with you. That's the way a modern city should run. You know, in terms of the BQX, the mayor's potential proposal for a light rail line along the Brooklyn-Queens waterfront, certainly I think we've had a lot of great debate about it. I think we're still looking at the analysis. The goal of the project was not to put a lot of city funds into it, but was to have it pay for itself, and I think that remains the central challenge of the evaluation. Can you do a project that will pay for itself in terms of real estate value? So I think we're still looking at that, so don't worry yet. I think you'll be hearing more about it in the coming months.
Thank you.
Hi, Guido Hartre with Marvel Architects. Among the statistics that you showed and that kind of are very positive and are part of the streetscapes that we all enjoy in New York City, the one maybe that I think the only negative thing that I saw was this increasing congestion, and clearly there are all sorts of ways that kind of technology is giving people more access to moving around in cars, and that is something that, you know, to some extent the streetscapes that have been able to be created over the past years, that capacity was created by kind of limiting people's access to vehicles. I guess I'm just wondering, is that system-wide? Is there a solution to that? Is it physical? Is it policy? How do we kind of, as a city, regain control over kind of cars actually having the right burden of costs that they impose on the fellow citizens?
So if you look back to the slide about car ownership in the city, and we also track the number of daily trips into the core of Manhattan through the bridges and tunnels, it's interesting. Over the years, it's actually remained pretty flat, and we've spent a lot of time in the past few years, because there's no question, I would like to pretend otherwise, but we get taxi data and we get bus data, and travel speeds in the central business district core in particular have gone down quite a bit. I mean, when people say it's never been so congested, unfortunately that's probably true. And we've spent a lot of time trying to disaggregate and analyze the causes behind it. I think one thing we concluded, particularly I'd say in the first couple of years of the de Blasio administration, a lot of it was just growth in the city. When you have more population and more tourists and more economic, you have more people on the streets, you have more people hailing cabs, you have more construction taking out lanes of traffic, and any little incident that goes wrong has more of a ripple effect. So part of that was just basically a symptom of our growth and our economic prosperity. You know, we can all think of cities where perhaps unemployment is high and economic growth is low, and maybe there's not a lot of traffic. So traffic is often a sign of economic prosperity. We have seen, though, in the past couple of years, and some of you have probably seen the data, Bruce Schaller, who's done a lot of work on this, has started to see now that the rise of the for-hire vehicles, Uber, Lyft, et cetera, has really started to become a factor in congestion. We've been lucky since this summer, we've now been gathering much more refined data from companies like Uber and Lyft, pickup and drop-off data, and that's really going to help us, I think, in the next year or so, come up with much more refined models about what's happening. In terms of how we might regulate them, I mean, look, there are a lot of policy thinkers in this room. There are a lot of ideas on the table. Surcharges, congestion pricing, you name it. I don't sense that the sort of the political world, either at the city or the state level, has yet gelled on some of those potential demand management solutions, but certainly a lot of people are discussing them right now, and I think in the coming years we will probably come together on some of those. Hey, Roger.
Hi. Roger Hers, time and acronym to improve municipal efficiency. My question relates to your hat as a member of the MTA board. I have...
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
I was involved a long time ago in the New York State Freedom of Information Law, a very valuable resource when documents which should be made available set up a procedure to obtain. A very valuable MTA report required by law is the quarterly report by the IG and specific response from MTA. In 2000, it turns out that MTA decided that this would be a wonderful excuse to avoid making access to documents. And when I asked for the latest document, I was told you'll have to file an FOI request. And that has been a continuing corporate culture on. It started when the then chair, Virgil Conway, to protect then Governor Pataki, to slow down the access to information. It's a systemic problem which is totally unnecessary, and particularly with talk now about either dashboard or something similar and making more information available, great opportunity.
Good, Roger, okay.
Yeah, and Roger, I'm always happy to get your ideas afterwards. I mean, I think those of you who followed lately debates in the MTA, I have been, you know, publicly outspoken about the fact that I think there is not enough transparency in how that agency conducts business for business members, for board members, or for the public. And look, I think the agency is arguably the most consequential in the life of the city, and the investments it's making, particularly at this moment now. Again, as the city is growing, as the subway system, obviously we've had a terrible summer with breakdowns and a lot of challenges. Getting the priorities right, getting the investments right, spending those precious dollars wisely. As we continue to have a debate about, do we need to put more dollars in, the city, the state? I mean, that debate is an important one as well. So I agree with you, and happy to talk to you more. I mean, I do think, and look, I run an agency too, and sometimes we make people foil us, so I'm not going to be too high and mighty on that score. And we get thousands of FOIL requests.
Thank you. In this very room, Tom Prendergast, 4 years ago, said he was proud that a high percentage of correspondence that comes in are FOI requests. High priority, right?
On this side.
Yes, sir.
When I walked in and it was announced that your lawyers were here, I had in my mind's eye Stephen Colbert on his old program where he'd say something derogatory about Leslie Moonves, the screen would go dark and he'd come up and he was retracting everything he just said and was signing documents being put in front of him by his lawyers. Aside from that, that's...
I retract nothing.
It's not over.
That's true.
The couple of things that were not on the screens. Number one, your real problem with the BQE is the state is not participating. They've zeroed out their contribution to this interstate, found an excuse, zeroed it out. More money for the Tappan Zee. Also, I'm from Brooklyn, Sunset Park, Community Board 7. They did a rebuild of the Gowanus Expressway, and it's a wonderful roadway from above, but from below it's a rusting hulk because, and I asked, money was never provided to finish it. Again, more money for the Tappan Zee.
Let me cut you off because we have other people standing. Those are two good questions, so let's see.
No, that's not my question.
Oh, it sounded
My
like
question
All right, what's your question?
After the election, will they be zeroing out the BQX?
Well, I won't
Another
make
thing
any,
you didn't
I
mention.
won't make any predictions about the election. I will just say, though, that you are right. The state at one point actually undertook its own environmental work on the BQE triple cantilever and was clearly planning on making it a state project. And I think I'll just be honest, I don't think they would deny this. They discovered sort of the cost complexity and the political aggravation of it was more than they had the stomach for, and now it's become a city project. You know, that's okay. We continue to hope, and actually we've worked with some of our elected officials up in Albany. I think we continue to hope at some point the state will be more of a partner. I agree with you, they should be. It is essentially New York City's major interstate, and traditionally states in those situations have contributed a certain amount towards the cost and helped with the engineering, the processing, et cetera. BQX we'll have to see after the election. We'll see how the election turns out. As I say, it's a cliffhanger.
How's the
Not in your
Gowanus?
presentation.
How's the Gowanus?
I mean, look, I I'm not a fan of that one predates me, and I know it was another one where there was a lot of disappointment that the state didn't do something more, I think, innovative there, and particularly as the questioner points out, the underside is pretty much not exactly what you would call nice. We are trying to do some work to at least, it's actually an initiative we've started citywide, we're sort of calling it Under the Elevated, to go into places where you have these old dark elevated highways, mainly courtesy of Robert Moses, and also subway and rail infrastructure, and see at least what we can do to brighten them, to make safer pedestrian crossings. I'm not going to...
Parking for Industry City, which just yesterday announced they want to add 1 million square feet. They are being used.
Okay.
People who make a living of taking city property and making money on it don't recognize that there's like 500 cars for staffing and visitors to Industry City, and also the residents.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to have to ask you to stop. We are at 9:30. I always like to stop. This is the last question. I'm sorry to those still standing. Yes, you are the last.
Okay, my name is Axel
Make it
Heller.
good.
Okay. So I come from New Jersey. So my question is, what is the DOT doing about all of the...
You just lost the audience.
Oh, I got a lot of ridicule, don't worry. So my question is, what is the DOT doing to speed up the bus traffic coming through the Lincoln Tunnel and into Midtown? You talked a little about the select bus service, but my question is what's being done to speed up the commuter buses from out of state?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. One of my other hats, actually, I am at the moment the chair of something called Transcom, which is a group of the 16 transportation and law enforcement agencies in the tri-state region, but particularly with a focus on New York and New Jersey. And, you know, I would say we are focused on the incident management, traffic data, looking system-wide at how we improve conditions. But I would also say that a lot of that work does involve the Port Authority. They are the bi-state agency that controls the Hudson River crossings. You know, as much as I have the enviable task of being on the MTA board, one of, I think, the structural problems of the Port Authority has no city representation on it. We do spend a good amount of time, the mayor has no appointees, it's just the two states. We do spend a good amount of time trying to work with the Port Authority, and I will give them credit. A couple of years ago, they made some major reconfigurations to the Lincoln Tunnel and the bus terminal, and it did a lot to improve bus flows there. There's definitely more work to be done, and it does need to be done between both states. And it's funny, this week, some of you may know, I'll end on a New York note, is Manhattan Week. It's the week the mayor is sort of bringing city government around Manhattan and focusing on the challenges there. And I just spent some time with Councilwoman Margaret Chin, actually down by the entrance to the Holland Tunnel, looking at the traffic conditions there, where you have basically 16 lanes of traffic funneling into 2, which is a challenge, to put it mildly. And, you know, a knowledge that, and then watching as the buses, that what they do is they drop their passengers off in New York in the morning, they go back to New Jersey, and then right around rush hour, come back into Manhattan again. And we agreed that one of the things we need to do is we really do need to sit down again with the Port Authority, because how they are metering and dispatching and dealing with the traffic on their side of the river is going to have a big effect on what we're doing and vice versa. So it is certainly on the agenda to continue to improve. You know, bus travel by New Jersey continues to grow.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Let me just a round of applause for the commissioner. Excuse me. I want to thank the questioners also. I think we had more questions at this session than any other, and I appreciate the brevity of them and the fact that they were good. As we always do at these breakfasts, we like to give a product of the scholarship of the law school to the person who spoke at the breakfast, and this is by my colleague David Schoenbrod, DC Confidential. It's probably something you know all about, but it's the 5 tricks of Washington, and it's how Washington doesn't do all the things we want. So I give it to the person who probably did those tricks. And,
I did do those tricks.
I was
also pretty good at it.
The next, that I hope that, one of the questions I would like to ask, and maybe sometimes you'll tell us a little bit more about the legislative desires of the city in Washington, what we should be campaigning for, what kind of things that we can be asking for too. But with great gratitude for being here today and for a really exceptionally interesting conversation about transportation in the city, thank you. With gratitude to Commissioner Tucker.
Thank you. Thanks, Russ.
Really very good.
Thanks.
Really.
I'll savor being taller than you for just one more second. Here I go.